A woman who lives alone without a boyfriend is often misunderstood by the world around her. People look at her life and quickly assume something must be missing. They imagine loneliness sitting in the corners of her apartment, silence filling her evenings, and sadness waiting for her when the lights go off. But what they fail to understand is that solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. A woman who chooses to live alone without attaching herself to the wrong person is not empty. She is intentional. She has reached a level of emotional awareness that many people never reach in their entire lives. She understands that peace is expensive and she refuses to pay for it with chaos. There's a quiet strength in a woman who wakes up every morning and builds her life without leaning on someone who has not proven he deserves that place beside her. She cooks her own meals. She manages her own finances. She makes her own decisions. And she stands in the middle of her life knowing that everything around her exists because she created it. That kind of independence does not grow overnight. It comes from lessons, from disappointment, from watching what happens when people rush into relationships simply because they are afraid of being alone. Many women stay in relationships that drain them because they believe having someone, anyone, is better than having no one. They tolerate disrespect, inconsistency, broken promises, and emotional confusion just so they can say they are not alone. But the woman who lives alone without a boyfriend has stepped outside that cycle. She has looked at the reality of modern relationships and made a powerful decision. If love is going to enter her life, it must arrive with honesty, respect, and stability. Otherwise, she is perfectly capable of continuing her life exactly the way it is. Her evenings might be quiet, but quiet does not mean empty. Quiet means there's no arguing, no guessing games, no wondering where someone is or why they suddenly stop caring. Quiet means she can sit with her thoughts, read a book, watch a movie, pray, plan her future, or simply breathe without carrying the emotional weight of someone else's inconsistency. That silence becomes a form of luxury. It becomes a space where she reconnects with herself. She learns who she truly is when no one else is shaping her identity. She discovers her interests, her passions, the things that make her feel alive. Some nights she may cook a beautiful meal just for herself, setting the table with care, even though no one else is sitting there. Other nights she may order something simple and laugh at a favorite show. She fills her life with small moments that belong entirely to her. There is dignity in that kind of life. There is clarity in it. People often believe that a woman living alone must secretly be waiting for someone to rescue her from that life. They assume she is counting the days until a man arrives to complete the story. But the truth is something very different. She is not waiting to be rescued. She has already rescued herself from the pressure to prove her worth through a relationship. She has already walked away from the belief that her value is measured by whether someone chooses her. That shift in thinking changes everything. When a woman stops chasing attention and starts protecting her peace, the energy around her changes. She moves differently. She speaks differently. She carries herself with a quiet confidence that cannot be faked. She does not rush to answer every message. She does not rearrange her entire life to make space for someone who has not shown consistent effort. She understands that access to her life is something that must be earned. And that is what makes her powerful. Not because she is trying to prove something, but because she is no longer afraid of standing alone. Fear is what keeps many people trapped in unhealthy situations. Fear of loneliness, fear of judgment, fear of starting over. But once a woman experiences the calm that comes from living life on her own terms, that fear begins to disappear. She starts to see relationships differently. Instead of asking herself whether someone likes her, she begins asking whether someone deserves her time, her energy, and her trust. Instead of trying to impress someone, she observes how they behave. She watches their consistency, their character, the way they treat people when there's nothing to gain. She has learned that charm without integrity is dangerous. Living alone also teaches her responsibility. Every bill, every decision, every challenge becomes hers to handle. At first, that responsibility can feel heavy, but over time it becomes empowering. Each problem she solves becomes another reminder that she is capable. Each goal she reaches becomes proof that she does not need to depend on someone who may or may not stay. And through that process, something remarkable happens. Her standards rise not out of arrogance, but out of experience. She knows what it took to build the life she now enjoys. She knows the effort, the patience, and the sacrifices behind it. So when someone wants to step into that life, she expects them to come with the same level of maturity and intention. She is not interested in games. She is not interested in half-hearted effort. She is not interested in someone who shows up only when it is convenient. Because she understands something many people overlook. The wrong relationship can disturb the peace that took years to build. So she protects that peace fiercely. She protects her time, her energy, her emotional well-being. And while the world may continue to question her choices, she moves forward with quiet certainty. She knows that living alone does not make her incomplete. It makes her aware. It makes her selective. It makes her someone who would rather stand confidently by herself than sit beside someone who cannot respect her value. When a woman learns how to truly enjoy her own company, something powerful begins to happen inside her. The world often teaches women that happiness must come from being chosen, from being loved, from having someone beside them. From a young age, many grow up hearing that the ultimate goal is to find a partner, build a relationship, and feel complete through someone else's presence. But the moment a woman steps away from that pressure and begins to build a life she genuinely enjoys on her own, everything about her mindset begins to shift. At first, learning to enjoy your own company can feel unfamiliar. Silence can feel louder than expected. There are no constant messages lighting up the phone, no one demanding attention, no emotional drama interrupting the day. But as time passes, that silence transforms into clarity. A woman begins to hear her own thoughts again. She begins to understand what she actually wants from life, not what the world has been telling her she should want. She begins filling her time with things that nourish her mind and spirit. Maybe she develops new skills, explores new interests, invests time in her career, strengthens her relationship with faith, reconnects with friends and family, or simply creates routines that make her feel grounded. Each day she becomes more familiar with herself. She learns what brings her peace and what disturbs it. She learns the difference between attention and genuine care. This process slowly removes the desperate need to chase love, because when someone has built a life they enjoy, waking up to every day, they stop searching for someone to rescue them from boredom or loneliness. Love stops being a solution to emptiness and instead becomes something that must add value to an already meaningful life. That change is noticeable. People can feel it even if it is never spoken aloud. A woman who is content with herself carries a different kind of presence. She is not constantly seeking validation. She does not need someone else's approval to feel worthy. Her confidence comes from the life she is actively creating, not from the attention she receives. When a woman reaches that point, her behavior in relationships changes dramatically. She stops accepting the bare minimum. She stops interpreting small gestures as proof of deep love. She becomes patient enough to observe actions over time. If someone shows inconsistency, she notices it quickly. If someone speaks beautifully but behaves poorly, she sees the difference. Her emotional intelligence becomes sharper because she is no longer blinded by the fear of losing someone. The truth is that desperation often hides red flags. When someone feels they must secure a relationship at all costs, they begin ignoring the signs that something is wrong. They tolerate disrespect because they fear starting over. They make excuses for behavior that clearly shows a lack of effort. But the woman who enjoys her own life is not operating from fear. She knows that losing the wrong person will not destroy her happiness. Because of that, she becomes very difficult to manipulate. Empty promises no longer impress her. Grand words without consistent action lose their power. She begins to measure love not by intensity, but by stability. Not by how exciting someone is in the beginning, but by how reliable they remain over time. Ironically, this is the exact moment when the right kind of man begins to notice her. Not because E is trying to attract attention, but because confidence and self-respect naturally draw people in. When a woman who values her own life signals something important without ever saying it directly, she will not tolerate being treated casually. Men who are used to easy attention often feel confused by this kind of woman. They notice that she does not chase, she does not beg for explanations, and she does not compete for someone's interest. If communication becomes inconsistent, she simply continues living her life. If effort disappears, so does her availability. She does not create drama. She simply withdraws access. But men who are mature, intentional, and emotionally secure recognize something else entirely. They see a woman who respects herself enough to require real effort. They see someone who is not looking for someone to complete her, but someone who is capable of walking beside her. That kind of woman becomes incredibly valuable because she is not driven by desperation or fantasy. She understands that attraction is easy, but compatibility takes time. She knows that attention is common, but commitment requires character. She has watched enough relationships rise and collapse to understand that excitement alone cannot sustain love, so she moves differently. When she meets someone new, she does not rush to fill her schedule with them. She does not abandon her routines or her priorities just to prove interest. She allows things to develop naturally. She observes how someone handles responsibility, communication, patience, and respect. And because she is not chasing love, she is able to recognize genuine effort more clearly. When a man truly values a woman who respects herself, he does not feel threatened by her independence. Instead, he admires it. He sees that she has built a life through discipline and self-awareness. And he understands that becoming part of that life is something that must be earned. That recognition often creates a different kind of connection. Instead of rushing into emotional chaos, the relationship begins with mutual respect. Both people are showing up because they want to, not because they are trying to fill an emotional void. The woman who once felt pressured to find love eventually realizes something surprising. The more she focused on building her own happiness, the less she needed to search for someone to provide it. Her life became full in ways she did not expect. Her standards became clearer. Her choices became wiser. And when love finally appears in her life, it does not feel like something she chased or forced. It feels like something that arrived because she created a life worth sharing, a life built on independence, clarity, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing she is already whole on her own. Being single is often treated like a problem that needs to be solved. Society looks at a woman who is not in a relationship and immediately begins asking questions. People wonder what went wrong, what she is waiting for, or why someone has not chosen her yet. The assumption is always the same. If a woman is single, something must be missing in her life. But that way of thinking completely ignores another powerful possibility. Sometimes being single is not a sign of absence. Sometimes it is proof of strength. A woman who refuses to lower her standards just to avoid being alone is demonstrating a level of self-respect that many people struggle to maintain. It is easy to say you have standards when life is comfortable and attention is plentiful. But the real test of those standards appears when loneliness tries to convince you to settle. It appears when someone enters your life offering affection mixed with confusion, charm mixed with inconsistency, promises mixed with disappointment. Oh, to that moment, many people compromise. They begin negotiating with their own values. They tell themselves that nobody is perfect, that maybe things will improve, that perhaps they are expecting too much. Slowly, they start ignoring behaviors that once felt unacceptable. Disrespect becomes a misunderstanding. Lack of effort becomes temporary stress. Emotional distance becomes something that just needs patience. But the woman who chooses to remain single rather than accept a relationship that diminishes her peace has already learned something important about love. She understands that companionship without respect is not love. Attention without commitment is not love. Words without consistent action are not love. This understanding usually comes from experience. Most people do not reach this level of clarity without going through situations that teach them hard lessons. Maybe she once believed that loving someone deeply would automatically inspire them to treat her well. Maybe she once thought that patience and loyalty would transform someone who was not ready to grow. Maybe she invested time, energy, and emotions into someone who appreciated her presence, but never truly valued her. Over time, she began noticing patterns. She saw how some people enjoy the benefits of a relationship without carrying the responsibility of one. They like the emotional support, the attention, the comfort of knowing someone cares about them. But when it comes to consistency, accountability, and genuine effort, they disappear or make excuses. Experiencing that kind of imbalance forces a person to make a decision. Continue tolerating situations that slowly drain emotional strength, or step away and rebuild life with stronger boundaries. Choosing the second path requires courage because it often means walking away from someone you once cared about deeply. When a woman chooses that path, the outside world may misunderstand her decision. Friends may question why she entered a relationship that looked fine from the outside. Family members may remind her that nobody is perfect. Some people may even suggest that she's expecting too much, but they are not the ones living inside the relationship. They are not the ones experiencing the quiet moments of disappointment the repeated excuses, the emotional exhaustion that comes from constantly hoping someone will become who they promise to be. Only the person inside the relationship truly understands this reality. Remaining single after recognizing that reality is not a failure. It is a declaration. It is a statement that emotional well-being matters more than maintaining the appearance of a relationship. It is a refusal to participate in situations where love feels one-sided. This kind of decision also transforms the way a woman sees herself. Instead of measuring her worth by whether someone chooses her, she begins measuring it by the way she chooses her. She begins measuring it by the way she chooses hers. She begins prioritizing environments where respect is mutual, communication is clear, and effort flows in both directions. She also becomes more aware of the difference between loneliness and freedom. At first, being alone after leaving a relationship can feel uncomfortable. There are routines that suddenly disappear, conversations that stop, familiar habits that no longer exist. But as time passes, she begins noticing something else. Peace. There are no confusing signals to interpret. No late night arguments draining her energy. No wondering whether someone truly means the things they say. Her emotional space becomes calm again. That calm allows her to rebuild confidence that may have slowly faded during a difficult relationship. During this time, she often grows in ways that would have been impossible while constantly focusing on someone else. She reconnects with goals that were placed aside. She invests time in friendships, personal development, spiritual growth, and self-discovery. Her life becomes fuller, not because someone new entered it, but because she reclaimed the parts of herself that were neglected. And through that process, her standards stop feeling like rules imposed by pride. They become natural reflections of her values. She understands the kind of communication she expects. She recognizes the effort that a healthy relationship requires. She knows that mutual respect is not something that needs to be negotiated or begged for. When she eventually meets new people, she approaches them with a completely different perspective. Instead of trying to prove she is worthy of love, she simply observes whether someone's character aligns with the life she has built. She watches how they treat others, how they handle responsibility, how they communicate during difficult moments. If those qualities are missing, she no longer feels the need to force compatibility. She is comfortable enough with her own life to walk away from situations that do not feel right. That ability to walk away becomes one of her greatest strengths, because the truth is that many people remain in unhealthy relationships simply because they are afraid of being single again. They fear the quiet, the uncertainty, the judgment of others. But the woman who has already faced those fears and discovered peace on the other side understands something powerful. Being single is not the absence of love. It is sometimes the evidence of self-respect. It is the result of refusing to trade personal dignity for temporary companionship. It is the quiet strength of someone who would rather wait for a relationship built on honesty and effort than rush into one built on convenience and illusion. The most powerful woman is not the one who constantly proves she can attract attention. It is not the one who is surrounded by admirers or the one who never spends a moment alone. Real power appears in a woman who can live happily by herself, a woman who wakes up each day without needing someone else to validate her existence, a woman who understands that her happiness is something she creates, not something she waits for another person to deliver. Many people grow up believing that relationships are the main source of joy in life. They imagine that the arrival of the right partner will suddenly solve their emotional struggles and fill every empty space inside them. Because of that belief, they begin searching for someone who will become the center of their happiness. They hand over emotional responsibility to another person, hoping that love will carry the weight of their expectations. But the woman who has learned to live happily on her own understands a different truth. She understands that placing the entire responsibility of happiness on another person is unfair and unstable. People are human. They have flaws, bad days, changing emotions, and personal struggles. When someone becomes the sole source of another person's happiness, the relationship slowly becomes heavy and fragile. That is why the woman who has learned to enjoy her life independently becomes so powerful. Her happiness does not depend on whether someone texts her in the morning. It does not depend on whether someone compliments her or spends every moment beside her. Her sense of peace comes from the life she has built with her own effort and awareness. She has routines that belong to her. She has passions that continue whether someone else participates or not. She has goals that give her direction and purpose. She has friendships, family connections, personal interests, and spiritual grounding that shape her daily life. Because of all these things, her wealth is already full before a relationship even enters the picture. When a man meets a woman like this, he quickly realizes something important. He is not stepping into a life that is empty and waiting to be filled. He is stepping into a life that already has structure, meaning, and direction. That realization changes the dynamic completely. Instead of being expected to provide happiness, he is simply invited to add to it. His presence is not required for her to feel complete, but it is welcomed if he brings genuine value. That difference may seem small at first, but it changes the entire foundation of a relationship. A woman who relies entirely on a partner for happiness often tolerates behavior that slowly erodes her peace. When someone becomes the source of your emotional stability, the fear of losing them can make you accept things you normally would not accept. Disrespect gets ignored. Broken promises get forgiven repeatedly. Boundaries become weak because the relationship feels too important to risk. But the woman who is already happy on her own does not operate from that fear. She appreciates companionship, but she does not depend on it for survival. If someone treats her with kindness, respect, and consistency, she welcomes their presence warmly. If those qualities disappear, she does not collapse emotionally because her life still stands strong without them. This independence is not coldness. It is not a rejection of love. It is simply clarity about where happiness truly comes from. Love can enhance life in beautiful ways, but it cannot replace self-respect, personal growth, and emotional stability. Because of this clarity, the woman who can live happily by herself becomes very careful about who she allows into her personal space. She has invested time and energy into building peace in her life, and she knows how easily the wrong relationship can disturb that peace. She pays attention to character more than charm. She notices consistency more than excitement. She watches how someone behaves over time rather than believing every promise spoken in the early stages of attraction. This patience protects her from rushing into situations that look appealing on the surface but lack the foundation necessary for a healthy partnership. She understands that real love is not proven through dramatic gestures or intense emotions at the beginning. It is proven through steady effort, honesty, and respect that remain consistent even after the excitement fades. When the right person eventually appears in her life, the relationship develops in a balanced way. Both people bring their own sense of happiness and stability into the connection. Neither person is trying to rescue the other from emptiness. Instead, they are sharing lives that were already meaningful before they met. That kind of partnership feels lighter. There is less pressure, less insecurity, less emotional dependency. Both individuals support each other, encourage growth and contribute to each other's well-being without losing their own identities. The woman who once learned how to stand happily on her own feet continues maintaining that independence even within the relationship. She keeps nurturing her personal goals, friendships, and spiritual life. She does not abandon the parts of herself that existed before love arrived. And that balance makes the relationship stronger, because when two people choose to be together while knowing they are capable of living independently, the connection becomes a choice rather than a necessity. Each day they remain together because they genuinely value each other's presence, not because they are afraid of facing life alone. This is why the woman who can live happily by herself holds such quiet power. She does not chase relationships out of fear or pressure. She welcomes love with open arms, but she also understands that her happiness was never meant to depend entirely on another human being.